A turning point in the fight against ISIL in Iraq. Iraqi forces are trying to take back Ramadi from ISIL control. Is the group on the retreat? Has the Iraqi government learnt lessons from previous failures? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Sami Zaidan. For months, the Iraqi government has promised a major offensive to retake cities held by the Islamic State of Iraq in the Levant. And now it seems it's finally delivering on that pledge. Iraqi forces are closer than ever to winning back Ramadi, west of the Iraqi capital. Well, it's the main city in Al-Anbar province, the heartland of the country's Sunni population. The battle for Ramadi, less than 100 kilometers from Baghdad, is ongoing, we're told. On Tuesday, Iraqi forces were in gunfights close to the center of the city for the first time since ISIL fighters moved in last May. And Baghdad says hundreds of ISIL fighters have been killed in the last 2 weeks in a push backed by US airstrikes. The forces on the ground include soldiers and Sunni tribal fighters, but not the Shia militias who've dominated much of the fight against ISIL this year. Well, if Iraq manages to retake Ramadi, it'll be a major win for those fighting ISIL and what's already been a year of net loss for the armed group. This is what ISIL's territory looked like at the start of 2015. And over the course of the year, they've gained this territory, including the historical town of Palmyra in Syria. But according to IHS Janes, ISIL's overall territory shrank about 14% this year, much of it lost to Kurdish fighters in northeastern Syria. And the Iraqi government won back some 6% of its territory from ISIL this year too. Well, lots to discuss then. Let's bring in our guests into the show. Joining us from Washington, D.C., Rahman Al-Jabouri, Senior Program Officer for the Middle East and North Africa at the National Endowment for Democracy. In Bristol, Matthew Glanville, former Special Advisor to the Iraqi government. He was also Advisor to the Governor of Al-Anbar province. And completing our panel from London, Sabah Al-Mukhtar, President of the Arab Lawyers Association. A warm welcome to you all. If I could start with Mr. Glanville, government forces and their allies seem to be making progress. What's changed since Ramadi fell in May?
The Iraqi government is more coordinated and is receiving much more backing and much more on-the-ground backing from the US military, particularly in the form of airstrikes. But what's also happened is that the Shia militias that played such an important role in the Iraqi government before this summer have been slightly pushed into the background. So the Shia militias who wouldn't have been able to operate in Ramadi aren't there, and that means that the Iraqi conventional and special forces are able to take the fight to the Islamic State without inflaming Sunni opinion further in Al-Anbar.
Okay, so more training in the picture, less militias, Shia militias in the picture. I guess my question, Mr. Al-Mukhtar, is what about the Sunnis? Has there been a change in their role that's helped the progress of the Iraqi army?
Well, I don't know what's this business of the Sunni, whether they are there or not. The idea is that there is an insurgency in Ramadi, and the government, with the help of the US forces, is trying to quash it or liberating Anbar, which at the end of the day, it's going to be a scorched earth policy, just like was done in Diyala, in Tikrit, in Beji. We've already seen some of the pictures of Ramadi, which is shows the degree of destruction. So I don't know.
But Mr. Al-Mukhtar, haven't we seen some Sunni tribes now? They are fighting alongside government forces. Isn't this slightly different from some of those other battles you've mentioned?
Well, I think the Sunnis were fighting with the Americans, or some of the Sunnis were. You remember we had the Sahwas and we had all sorts of things. The Speaker of the Parliament is a Sunni, the Vice President, the Deputy Prime Minister, etc., etc. So this idea of somehow that you have the Sunnis, that area does not have Shias in it. So you have some people with and some people are against. Some of the people are with the government, some of them are against the government. Some of them, you have sometimes cousins and brothers fighting on both sides. One of them is an ISIS guy and the other one is an army guy. And the third one probably is with the tribe. So I don't know what is this idea of somehow the Sunnis as if they were or they were not. That area is full of Sunnis. and of all sorts and all shapes and colors. So there is nothing new in that one. The only difference at this time is that the militias are not there. And therefore, there is a pretense that somehow it's going to be different. But I think anybody in the, who works in the army, whether the Iraqi army or the American army, should be ashamed of themselves talking about, you know, the winning of the thing. You have something like 10,000 men fighting, I don't know, a few hundred men who are mishmash people, and they've taken so long, they're still talking about achievements and liberation when the airplanes are destroying everything in sight.
Okay, let's get the perspective of Mr. Al-Jabouri. Do you agree with that characterization that this is not really a victory that the Iraqi army can tout and be proud of?
I have to disagree with my friend Sabah Al-Mukhtar. First, let us go back a few months ago when the Iraqi army collapsed in Ramadi. Calling Ramadi as insurgent, that's really misleading because there is a terrorist group sitting in Ramadi. What is great that now we see that the resurging of the Iraqi institution, what I mean by that, this is the first time we've seen the Iraqi army and the police, who are the official representative of the state leading the battle. Yes, we see a lot of coordination with the U.S. Army, with the advisor, and also there is 13,000 Sunni Arab tribes, men who are fighting or at least waiting to hold the city. Are not
Mr.
taking
Jabouri,
the city.
Is it really accurate simply to describe this as the Iraqi government fighting terrorism? Doesn't that cover the fact that we've seen Al-Anbar province at the center of some sort of, you don't want to call it insurgency, but some kind of rebellion and protest against the central government in Baghdad, even before May, when ISIL moved in and took over? There was this feeling amongst Sunnis that there were problems in the way the central government was dealing with them.
That's absolutely right, and that's basically with the previous government, with the Maliki government. But we have a new government. We have a prime minister who is no sectarian. We have the speaker who is no sectarian. And there is a political agreement between the Sunni and the Iraqi government to go through Ramadi. And we have a lot of brokers in this agreement, the United States, the Gulf, and literally the Turks have broken this deal to go through Ramadi. But again, I want to go back to Ramadi, a few fighters from the ISIS. Ramadi is a big bomb right now. It is not a few soldier or ISIS soldier sitting in Ramadi. Each house of Ramadi right now, each street, each tunnel in Ramadi, it is a bomb by itself. So you have to be careful when you get entered to the Ramadi, because you don't want to lose, first, your soldiers. Second, there is still civilian in Ramadi, and you have to be so careful moving one step to another step.
I could see Sabah Al-Mukhtar there shaking his head, I think, in disagreement. So before I go back to Mr. Glanville, I want to give you a quick opportunity to tell me why you seem to be in disagreement.
First of all, there is no Gulf state, there is no Turkey, there is, the army is fighting. The reference to, I don't know, 13,000 or whatever is another myth. The idea that somehow Ramadi is of course it's a bomb, because the government is trying to take over. And if you are fighting there, whether you are one person or not, whether you are a principled person or a terrorist, you're going to take the necessary measures. But we're talking about an army with an air force, the American Air Force, trying to take over a city which has, according to the information from the Iraqi government and the Americans, only a few hundred terrorists in Ramadi. So what are we trying to do? Where is this battle of wills? Where is this battle of the organization and the state institution? What army are we talking about?
But,
this is what the Americans are trying to say.
What about the point which Mr. Al-Jabouri made, that this is a different Iraq right now? It's not the Nouri al-Maliki Iraq. Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi's made moves. There are senior Sunnis in some key positions. Does any of that give a different context to the fighting?
Not at all. Maliki and Abadi, both of them are Hizb al-Dawah. Abadi cannot enforce one single decision he has made, because Maliki is in the background. The main thing, both of them are working according to the agenda of the Iranians. That's why both Abadi is against the American intervention and the Hashd al-Sha'bi are against the American intervention, because the Americans, it is perceived that the Americans are trying to fulfill their program of establishing the Sunni state. Because we have the Shiites, we have the Kurds. What is lacking is the Sunni state. Since 2003, we are trying to create this one. And this is what they are trying to do now.
We'll get into that in a minute. And I can see also Mr. Jabouri, I think, is shaking his head in disagreement now. But I want to bring Mr. Glanville before we get too much into this exchange. The fact that you have the army, Mr. Glanville, leading this charge, shall we say, in Ramadi, does that mean that you truly have a unified national army in charge right now?
No, it doesn't. It means that certain elements of the army are able to operate in Sunni areas, and certain of the very highly trained elements of the army with a lot of American support. But it doesn't undermine the basic point, which is that the army is overwhelmingly Shia. The government is perceived by a lot of Sunni opinion, probably a majority of Sunni opinion, to be overly dominated by Iran and overly controlled by the Shia. So this relatively small military success, and both your other guests are correct that the number of Islamic State fighters in Ramadi is relatively small. But we have to recognize that we've made some progress from where we were when Iraqi army units fled from Ramadi last year and then fled from Mosul the year before. So whilst the Abadi government hasn't done as much as it could, it is an improvement on the Maliki government in the sense of reaching out to the Sunni community.
Okay, so an improvement. But Mr. Glanville, let me read to you what Amnesty International, a senior member of Amnesty International, Sanjeev Berry, said in October 2014, and I quote, "There is a lot of close collaboration. These Shia militias are sometimes operating as formal Iraqi forces, wearing uniforms and driving military vehicles. It's difficult," he goes on to say, "to know how much of the Iraqi central government's limited victories against ISIS are the result of the Shia militias." When you talk about progress has been made, has any progress been made on those sorts of problems?
It has, but it's limited progress. I mean, the engagement of some Sunni tribal forces in their offensive on Tikrit back in the spring, the engagement, and I don't know to what extent, but some engagement of Sunni tribal forces in Ramadi is a positive step. I mean, we have to bear in mind the history here that Ramadi was the site of protests against Maliki two and a half years ago. So when Islamic State came in, they were pushing on an inflamed Sunni opinion that already existed. So the fact that Ramadi may be seems to be about to be retaken by the central government implies at least some shift in Sunni opinion. Right. And it's by no means ideal, and the Shia militias are a far too prevalent a force within the Iraqi government. But we have to recognize that partly because of international attention, their activities are being more curtailed than they were last year or the year before.
All right, Mr. Jabouri, who will govern Ramadi if it falls? Is there a consensus? Is there an agreement and a plan for the way forward?
Personally, I was in Iraq like less than 3 weeks ago, and I saw the speakers of the Iraqi parliament. I saw a lot of people in the Iraqi government. It seems... and also some people from the Shia religious establishment. It seems there is a lot of push from now to change the way that Iraq governing in the past, change the way that Maliki governing the country of Iraq.
How so,
and
Mr. Jabouri?
As a proof, when we go back to Tikrit liberation, who liberate Tikrit is the Shia militia. According to a lot of people I talked to yesterday, there is only about 50 Shia militia who are in support, but they are in the desert. So the people who get inside Ramadi right now, it's the Iraqi state. Yes, the military is majority Shia, and the Shia are the majority of Iraq. Yes, but the Minister of Defense, who is leading the battle too, he's a Sunni. He's close to Najafi family. So when we talk about there is improvement, I use the word research of the institution of Iraq. Nothing is perfect in Iraq. Not today, not tomorrow. But we have to give this opportunity The country need a moral victory. They need political victory. And Ramadi could be that victory that united Iraqis. Yes, of course, the Sunni get abused. Yes, the Sunni were rebel 2 years ago against the Maliki, and a lot of people support them, even within the Shia community. But the best is the best. Today is a new day in the Iraqi
is it really
history.
The past? I mean, if I may quote you, Mr. Al-Jabouri, the Human Rights Watch letter to the US President Barack Obama on April 13th, 2015, that we're not talking years ago, talked about the problem of the so-called anti-terrorism law, which had, quote, overbroad provisions permitting the authorities to prosecute individuals solely on the basis of their association with a particular tribe or sect. Now, it may be, you hear from Sunnis saying it may be very well to appoint the minister of this department or that department as a Sunni, but when it comes to the actual dealing with Sunnis, has much actually changed?
If you know Iraq well, it's really the structure of the government allowed the Shia for a long time. Now there is an opportunity to change that structure. We're getting people from the Sunni community who are powerful, who are influential, and they make policy in Iraq. We have to give it an opportunity. That's what I'm saying. We have to give the new government, the new parliament, an opportunity to lead the country, to fix what happened in the past. That's my opinion.
Okay. Salah al-Mukhtar, have the grievances... Oh, all right. Go ahead, Matthew Glanville. You want to get in there?
I was going to ask if you saw any potential for Tariq al-Hashimi to return, to come out of exile, to engage that generation of Sunni politicians as part of this process of engaging the Sunnis more widely in the Iraqi government. For example, Rafi Asawi as well.
Okay, I think that's a question from Mr. Al-Jabouri. Do you want to have a crack at that?
Yes, Mr. Jabouri.
Well, I will say again, there is a willingness to open all the files from the past. I know there is a lot of negotiation going between the Iraqi government with Tariq al-Hashimi, with Rafi al-Isawi, with others. But also, you have a community in the Shia. They think, they think Tariq al-Hashimi is a criminal. You have to work these things slowly again.
Okay, let me bring Sabah al-Mukhtar. There's been some engagement, as Mr. Al-Jabouri puts it, with the Sunni community, some appointments of key Sunni figures from important Sunni tribes and families. Has enough been done in meeting the grievances of the Sunnis to ensure that whatever alliance now exists between Sunni tribes and the Iraqi state doesn't unravel once again?
Well, quite honestly, if you look at from 2003 until now, Sunnis, so to speak, have been part of the exercise. The Americans have bought enough Sunnis because pre-2003, when they used to operate from London, they couldn't get any Sunni to join in except 2 or 3 people. After 2003, they bought quite a lot of people. They bought tribal leaders, they bought military guys, they brought all sorts of things. You have now the president is a British citizen, the prime minister is a British citizen, deputy prime minister is a British citizen, vice president is a British citizen, 7 ministers are British citizens. Most of them, or many of them, are Sunnis. But that doesn't make them anything to do with Iraq. But the idea is this. I think what's happening now, it is if the United States, the biggest power in the world, destroyed Iraq and couldn't rule it after that. The idea that somehow Abadi, with the Hashd al-Shabi and with the so-called Iraqi army, is going to, quote-unquote, liberate, i.e. destroy Ramadi, so that he can run it thereafter by having some people, you can have them. You can have a lot of sahwas. President Bush at the time landed in Iraq to meet Abu Risha. Abu Risha is still his brother or his cousin, I don't know, one of them, is still running around as a Sunni leader. You get Mutlaq, you get all sorts of people. Those people are not, they call themselves Sunnis. Abadi calls them
okay,
Sunni.
you made that
The Americans call them Sunni.
Mr. Sabah al-Mukhtar, what is Iraq heading to then? I think it's clear from the gist of what you're saying that there hasn't been enough done by the central government in Baghdad to meet Sunni concerns. So is Iraq heading towards partition, more autonomy? I mean, what exactly is the scenario that you see?
I think the policy of the West, the Americans and others, is to divide Iraq. That is to create the Sunni state. Now, this is the push. That's why the Americans wanted to have Ramadi now, so that thereafter they can say to the people in Mosul, now you have a Sunni state, so let's finish with that one. This is the program. That program is not going to work, because Sunniism is not an identity. Iraq, most of the Iraqis, including the Kurds, including the Shiites, many of them want to create an Iraq, a national Iraq. This is contrary to the plan which the Americans have put in 2003, that you have a Kurdish state, a Shia state, and now we want to create the Sunni state, which has been, they've been trying it since 2003. I don't think it will succeed. I think the regime in Baghdad is no longer tenable, but the Americans cannot see an alternative unless they find a Sunni state. And they have been doing it 2003 until now. Probably they will be able to buy a few more people. Probably they will destroy Ramadi. Probably they get some, I don't know, the governor of Ramadi, who's now sitting in Baghdad making pronouncements that he is the governor of Ramadi.
Let me get in here if I can, Sabah al-Mukhtar, because I can see, I think Mr. al-Jabouri wants to comment on that. Go ahead, sir.
Dear Sabah, as you know, the American has been in any official speech saying they need united Iraq. Where did you get your information? I don't know. One. Second, the Iraqi institution is clear. The Iraqi constitution is giving a flexibility to any governorate or any region to establish a region. There is nothing in the Iraqi constitution which is written to 2005 by Iraqis saying there is a plan, unless it is a conspiracy that you believe in. There is a plan to divide Iraq in a three state. The word state never came, even with Kurdistan, even with the Sunni. There is a flexibility in the constitution, and absolutely it is up to the Sunni
seems to be moves towards that, at least in terms of the Kurds.
My friend, I live in England. We are specialists in spin. That is, we make statements and we say things, but we do completely different. If you don't see what the Americans are doing and you think they want to create a unified state, despite the fact that now we have in London a Kurdish embassy, you have in Washington a Kurdish embassy, you have one in Paris, and you have, now they are starting to open a new office for the Sunnis. If you don't see all these things and you think because the constitution
it is not embassy, it is a regional representation.
Okay.
It is regional representation. I'm sitting here, it is not embassy.
All right, okay, let's bring Matthew Glanville into it. What would the fall of Ramadi mean for Fallujah, for Mosul, for some of the other ISIL-controlled areas? Is this group on the back foot, on the retreat, to the defeat?
They are somewhat on the retreat. They've lost 10 to 15% of the territory that they controlled in Syria and Iraq within the last year. But Ramadi itself is symbolically important, but in terms of logistics and sort of military operations, it's not hugely important. It controls the road network to the west of Baghdad. It will have an impact on Islamic State's ability to raise taxes from the people of Ramadi.
So what happens then? Do they become more of a guerrilla force operating Al-Qaeda rather than a caliphate, a so-called caliphate, I should say?
Yes, they'll move back to the west and the north of Ramadi, but they'll still control villages on those main routes that cross over towards Deir ez-Zor in Syria. So it won't have a huge effect from that point of view. I mean, if we compare, for example, the level of resources that the Islamic State put into the battle for Kobani last year, where they put in thousands and thousands of troops, whereas it seems that Ramadi they're trying to hold with a few hundred. So I think they recognise that in the face of Western air power and a more coordinated Iraqi army, they can't hold territory in that way. So they will pull out for probably to strike somewhere else that we're currently not paying attention to. So it may be that we see another attack in Beiji or potentially even the Mosul Dam, which are areas that they've vacated in the last few months.
I know our other guests want to continue to discuss this, but I'm afraid we're out of time. Sabah al-Mukhtar, I'm sure, I have a funny feeling we're going to be talking about this again in the very near future, so apologies that we do have to end it here. Let's thank our guests, Rahman al-Jabouri, Matthew Glanville, and Sabah al-Mukhtar. And thank you for watching. As always, you can leave your comments on the program page of our website, aljazeera.com. You can post your views on facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or tweet us at AJ Inside Story. From me, Sami Zaidan, and all the team, for now, it's goodbye.